Hello everybody, and welcome back to Diaries with Debby Friday. And today is a very special episode because we have our first guest on the podcast, and it is none other than Mike Stenbæk, also known as Form Attunement on Twitter. So, Mike is a human design analyst, and he's been studying human design for over a decade now. And if you haven't guessed already, we're going to be talking about human design today. So, for those of you who don't know what human design is, it is a self knowledge system and it was created by this person called Ra Uru in 1987. And one of the hallmarks of human design is that it's truly a syncretic and like hybrid philosophical system, is how I describe it. And it incorporates many different beliefs, many different traditions, including astrology, the I Ching, Vedic philosophy, quantum physics, and there's more stuff I'm sure that I'm forgetting right now. And you guys have probably heard me mention human design in a super early episode, but I sprinkle it throughout here and there because it's one of the frameworks that I use to understand the world, to understand myself. And I just think it's a really valuable tool and a very interesting philosophical system. But we're going to get into all of that. And if you'd like to listen to the extended version of this episode, you can do so at patreon.com/Debby Friday. And don't forget to subscribe wherever you are listening to this now. So first of all, thank you, Mike. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. This is fun.
For sure. So just for the listeners, can you introduce yourself a little bit and just tell us a bit about yourself?
Me, myself, I'm Mike. I'm a human design analyst. I've been doing that professionally for 6 years now. And like you said, studying it for a decade. And in addition to that, I've always kind of been a cartoonist and I publish a local arts newspaper here in Santa Fe. And I'm a triple split in human design. And so part of what that means is that I cycle through lives slowly but definitively. So the things that I do with my life will something will come radically into the foreground for years and then uh, disappear onto the back burner for years. Other so I've worn many a hat. Other things about my design that are pertinent, I guess, are I'm a 6'2" and I'm an emotional projector.
Oh, interesting. Cool, cool, cool. Um, okay, I kind of guessed that you were a projector just because I find a lot of projectors go into that like human design analyst role. Yeah, but that's interesting. Good to know. So the way that I came to human design was through astrology, actually. And I've been studying astrology now for over a decade. And it was really just like my first love in terms of alternative philosophical and like mystical frameworks. And the way that I approached it was always through this very like strong desire to understand other people. Like I always felt like, okay, I don't understand other people. I don't understand like why are they this way? Why do they do the things that they do? And it was really astrology that gave me a framework and a lens, and it contextualized a lot of experiences with other people. And it was through astrology that I came to human design because then I felt like this kind of turning point where I was like, okay, I spent all this time understanding other people, and now I wanted to spend time understanding myself. And, I'd heard about it previously just on the internet and whatever niche corners that I was in, but it wasn't until probably around like 2023, I want to say, that I started taking human design very seriously. So I'm curious, like, how did you come to human design? Like, what was your journey that brought you here?
Yeah, I was also an astrologer first for a few years. And I suppose preceding that, the reason I started paying attention to any sort of spiritual subjects was kind of naively. It was because stuff started happening to me. So I had basically no spiritual inquiry in my life. I was raised without any sort of with neither religion nor a defined absence of religion. Right? It's like it was true agnosticism that I was raised with, where religious questions were just not really an issue, nor were they around. They weren't in the community or anything. And then when I was 23, strange stuff started happening to me. I mean, among the strangest are just like encounters with intelligences outside of yourself and astral projection and stuff like that. And so basically, because of that, I started paying attention to astrology pretty much straight away. That was one of the first things I got into. And working with astrology in a mundane sense always appealed to me most. I mean, literal mundane astrology appealed to me, and then also similar to you, using it to account for, understand, and respect other people's differences was huge. So I was always a part of it. And so coming to it from that, with that sort of as the main part of my practice, human design was a very natural pivot because when I was trying to like help someone understand their differentiation, to use the human design word for it, working with a system like human design allowed me to do so much more for a person in an hour than astrology ever could. And I consider myself a pretty good astrologer, like I don't think it was I think it just like what's available to you when you're looking at a human design chart speaks to so much specificity and actionability compared to traditional Western astrology. So yeah, I mean, it was like a night and day difference. The first couple sessions that I gave as a human design reader, I'm like, wow, this. I feel like if the circumstances are right, you can wake someone up in the moment. Like it only takes one conversation really, and outside of outside of a dedicated session, that still happens to me to this day, just in the bar. People will, or at the cafe or whatever, people will just ask about it. It will come up, and it doesn't even have to be a full ass session. They'll leave that if the curiosity is genuine, if they're available to human design. I mean, you can have a 10-minute conversation with someone and sort of see the linguistic virus install itself, to use another sort of metaphor that people throw out for human design activation.
It is very detailed. It's like there's levels of detail in human design that I feel like I haven't even scratched the surface on.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. There's a lot of depth to it. Like going below the line, they call it, when you start to bring up colors and tones. And hardly anyone looks at planets, but planets can be really helpful. I'm a big advocate of learning about the Godheads, which are sort of the human design equivalent of the zodiac. It's just like 16 equal proportions around the wheel that are also just really kind of compelling from the human design metaphysics, because it's like these, you can imagine them almost as like 16 invisible satellites around Earth that are sort of filtering the cosmic information that's coming into the Earth as a crucible and guiding the hand of evolution.
Mhm.
So in primitive life forms, they're like compelling the production of amino acids. In human beings, obviously that translates to much more sophisticated uh, adjustments in our behavior, right? It changes our attitudes and our moods. And, when you have an organism that's this complex, there's that many more points of articulation. These archetypal um, satellites, I guess, sort of guide or facilitate what is being produced in everything that lives. So also when you compare human design to astrology, you have this like much more materialist explanation for the function of astrology. Because
Mm.
you have astrologers that are decades deep into their work, and for them, and I don't think that this is an unsatisfying way of conceptualizing it. I think it's very, very compelling, very valid. But they continue to see astrology functioning mainly through some sort of like mechanism of synchronicity only, right? But human
Mm.
design's like, no, there's these literal neutrinos coming in from stars. The planets are literally filtering that reach this electromagnetic sheath around the Earth um, and are then routed to the affairs of human beings. Right?
So almost like a scientific explanation for astrology or astrological phenomena.
It would certainly like itself to be human design. I mean, I think that's what Ra Uru, the kind of founder of human design, I think that's what he always envisioned. There's a famous story where he claimed that neutrinos, upon which this whole mechanism depends, he claimed that neutrinos had mass. And some scientists thought that, others didn't, and we hadn't proved it yet. And in his first decade or so teaching human design, he would go around with this sort of this funny little mystic looking hat, and he would teach human design wearing this exotic hat. And when they found out for human design that neutrinos have mass, when science proved that, he switched from his mystic hat to a baseball cap, and he wore a baseball cap when he taught human design for the rest of his life, because he's like, I'm no longer a mystic. So
Oh, really?
that was his uh, self identity pivot into human design as a science, but he always claimed it was. And
He
when they
claimed
talk,
that it was a science.
yeah, yeah, and it builds its tagline for itself is the science of differentiation, right?
Mhm,
And I don't think that science is particularly concerned with these sort of metaphysical questions, but it is like it's like empirical in the sense where it's like watch the mechanics at work, like sensitize yourself to the aura. You do see it in nature. You know, this isn't like an intellectual imposition onto reality that cultivate an allegiance to with your mind. Like you start to develop this body through living correctly as yourself that does have increased sensitivities, among them sensitivities to the aura. So I always and it and you kind of never know, right? When people are paying lip service to these concepts, even in the field of human design, for whom is the aura like a metaphor for styles of human conduct, and who actually is out here feeling this thing, right? Who
mhm,
experiences physically, somatically, the tap on the shoulder from a projector aura or the embrace of a generator's aura. Because when people say stuff like, oh, I know your type without having ever seen your charts, is that a habituated noticing of traits that commonly occur in certain types, or are they literally taking in that person's field, right?
mhm. And I guess it also depends on like the way that they're choosing to interpret that. Like for example, like feeling the tap of a projector's aura, like someone might use a totally different language to express that, like just feeling like, oh, I really like this person just, has a certain vibe or something, and that's what they're experiencing, but that's the way that they choose to phrase that.
Totally, absolutely. Yeah, because it's like it's especially if the framework isn't there, if those internalizations aren't made about what is real or whatever, then it's like the mind finds another way to explain it to yourself, right? I'm picking up on something from this person and I don't really have the either the framework to describe the exact somatic sensation of this, or I'm repressing that. I'm not letting myself believe it. I need another way to account for this. I think that happens all the time in other sorts of parapsychological experiences.
For sure. And so, like, I guess in line with that, like, what would you say human design actually is? Like, is it a philosophy, a cosmology, a religion, a cult? Like, what is it?
I don't know. It is kind of its own thing, isn't it? Yeah,
Yeah.
it's a metaphysical research project.
Okay.
That's what my friend Jonah used to say. I love that's the
A
one of the most satisfying terms. Yeah.
metaphysical research project. Okay. I can dig that. There's like the whole thing of when I think research project, again, I'm brought back to this idea of like the scientific method and this whole thing around experimentation and like testing hypotheses. And I feel like, at least in my experience of just trying to understand human design and like exploring the different concepts of it, there is this feeling of like, okay, I'm going to test out this part of it. I'm going to test out this part of it, like see like what works, what sticks, what doesn't.
Yeah,
Uh,
and then it's funny being the science of differentiation, you find out that there are people for whom their approach resembles that, and that's how it because if you really think about true mystery traditions or whatever, or what the theosophists call ageless wisdom or whatever, or the Gnostics, living gnosis or something like this, it's like it has its own intelligence, right? And it's seeking its own expression and elaboration in Earth through human instruments, and
mm,
its intelligence is enough so that it kind of knows who to find and filters itself through those vessels, through those channels, right? Or I guess it's also kind of similar to the morphogenetic field, right? It's like if reality really insists on conjuring a certain um, process or step or development in consciousness, it will find its way to do that. It will make use of whatever is available to itself at that time, right?
mhm,
Whatever artists or researchers or whatever it needs. And so for that reason, I think that the way that it can appear to people is highly flexible, right? And so in a way, it's like each person's version of human design is tailored to themselves, to their specific nervous system, through their specific inflection of awareness, right? Because
yeah.
ultimately what consciousness is, right, is this awareness project. And And differentiation is like it's like it seems to be like the goal of consciousness, or one of its goals of this particular time in its history is to make itself as diverse as possible, right? Experience itself from as many angles as it possibly can, right? And so
Mhm.
it needs wide proliferation of styles of witnessing and understanding in order to do that.
For sure. Okay, just also, so Steph, who is a friend of mine who actually encouraged me to reach out to you to do this episode. So she had a question about, she was wondering what is human design's conception of the universe. And I feel like there's a thread here with what you were just saying and talking about as far as like the way that intelligence chooses to express itself. Do you kind of want to expand on that? Like, what, in your own words, like, what do you think is the conception of the universe within human design?
That's a pretty big question. I mean, there's a
Yeah.
lot of colors and burn in the
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah.
the nutshell version of it, the
Yeah.
human design claim is that this experiment of self-reflected consciousness, of which the Earth is sort of the main ground, is sort of the crucible, is in service of turning the universe in that the universe is a living being, and that that being is basically a fetus. And what's happening on Earth is the development of the organ that eventually houses its own uh, ajna center, basically, right? So that our neighborhood of the universe or whatever is this neighborhood that's very much involved with forming a particular organ in a much greater being. And but when you really start to zoom in on these questions, you come up against these sort of ring past knots or whatever, these places that are just not only beyond our current like understanding of trying to make sense of them, but I think are sort of intended to preserve as mysteries, perhaps permanently, in order for this
Mm.
experiment to function, right?
So, like,
Uh,
some things we're just never going to know.
yeah, and that us not knowing them is almost like an engine generating the experience of this reality, right?
Hmm.
So if we were to pull the veil back on these things, then the illusion of separateness would collapse utterly, and we wouldn't really be involved in the work anymore if we do certain
Mm.
things. Uh, but yeah, the nutshell is we're growing the Ajna center of a big galactic fetus here on Earth, and
Okay.
that oh, and another interesting claim is that all yang, so human design is it's very binary and it's very yin yang, and it talks about its conception of the Big Bang or whatever is the collision between this primary yin crystal and this primary yang crystal, and that everything else that exists is sort of a fractal line of geometry extending from this initial collision.
Mhm.
But it purports that all yangness that exists is actually fabrication and is yin pretending to be yang. So there is no real yang. There is no true personality. There is only this highly sophisticated dressing up and construction of yin in order to create a sort of semblance of yang. So that in our consciousness experience we can sort of approximate what yang might be like. But yang will not enter this giant galactic being until much, much later in this entire project. I don't know, billions of years later or something. And there's
Okay.
also, I don't know, there's a
Yeah,
lot of
that's a
questions
lot.
in this cosmology. I
Okay.
don't want too many rabbit holes, but that's kind of the nutshell of it.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah.
I think I am following kind of the thread there a little bit. Like, I can sort of get it conceptually, but maybe that's a conversation for like a whole other episode.
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
because the other thing about questions like this is what do you even do with it? Like, it's like
Yeah.
big myths like that, like it's cool to have them as points of reference to help you contemplate sort of the mysteries of creation or whatever.
Mhm.
But again, it's like it's almost like too much exploration or too much fixation on them causes them to function less in life, because I think the more that you try and attach a sort of intellectual understanding to it, obviously you're going to limit what it actually is, what these images and motifs and dynamisms are attempting to, why the story is told this way in the first place is attempting to guide you to something, but it's never really supposed to thoroughly account for that thing that it's guiding you to,
Mhm.
right?
Totally. And I kind of see all of these like philosophical frameworks, these metaphysical frameworks, like I honestly see them in the same vein as I see art, for example, where it's like there is truth in it, but the truth that's like in it is not necessarily the art itself. It's like whatever it's triggering in you and whatever it sets off inside of you, and that is the like experience of the thing, like, and that's the whole point of it. And
Mhm.
so I really do see them in the same vein, where you're not, at least the way I approach it is that I try not to approach things from too much of like a literal basis. Like you just kind of got to be free and floaty with this stuff and just let it affect you, let it wash over you, and then see how you change as a result, because the change is the point.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Perfectly said.
Okay.
And what's especially interesting about that that summary is that that's another part of human design cosmology, is that there's these things called bases, which are sort of the fundamental constituents of reality. They're sort of the bedrock elements of reality.
Bases.
Bases, yeah. And in your own chart you can find your own composition of bases or whatever, but this galactic being itself, this universal being, became at a certain point in its development as an embryo, it became base four. And base four is the principle of art and the principle of relationship and the principle of design and arrangement and relating to other people, sort of uh, an assessment of appropriateness, an assessment of measure, things like this. And it's just so funny to me that it wasn't always the point. Like in the same way that a human fetus at a certain point in its time in the womb develops a gender, it's kind of like that's what happened to this being. This
Mm.
being wasn't always going to be this great representative of the principle of art, but apparently it was decided at some point in this human design mythos. And so it's just amusing to me to consider that art maybe at one time was not the point, but now it is for sure. Now it
Mm.
is
Okay.
sort of telos of reality as we know it.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe, well, I don't want to get too deep into this, but I was going to say, like, maybe that's like the point of said organism, like the encounter with us and with, reality as we exist in it right now. Like, that's almost like its art and its encounter with art in a way. But
Absolutely.
yeah. But anyway, so moving on.
Well,
I
let's go
wanted,
back.
what?
Let's go back to Earth.
Yeah, let's come back to Earth. Yeah, speaking of Earth, actually, I wanted to get to the heart of basically like one of the biggest things that I see people talking about in human design right now, which is the 2027 prophecy, which is supposed to happen in like 6 months or so. So first to begin, like, can you explain in just like really simple layman's terms, like the 2027 prophecy or shift or whatever, I don't even know what to call it, but just 2027, and if you want, like, you can also explain its connection with the late Bronze Age collapse.
Oh, okay, yeah. So February 15th, 2027 is the date in which uh, the cross of gates. So I mean, there's a lot of explain to do, I guess, if someone's not familiar with human design at all, right? But gates are basically further partitions of the zodiac, right? So each zodiacal sign has like 5.5 gates in it or something. So gates are sort of in a fixed place around the zodiacal band. Um, and the precession of the equinoxes, the plane of the ecliptic has, these very important, equinox solstice points. I'm sure you're familiar with from conventional astrology. And astrologers make a big deal of these ingresses too, right? When the vernal equinox moves from Pisces to Aquarius, then we're in the age of Aquarius, right? And
Mhm.
but they
Or
disagree
like a
about when
Pluto
it starts.
transit or whatever, yeah.
Yeah, so this is basically what we're looking at with 2027, but we're not looking at an ingress of signs. We're looking at an ingress of these gates, which again are only like 5 degrees of the zodiac. So instead of having to wait, 2,000 years or whatever it is for the change of sign, this happens every 411 years, more or less. So we've been in, and and basically whatever gates that are present on these highly sensitive points, right, are the gates that make up the sort of background frequency of Earth. So basically, the default concerns, priorities, motivations, impulses that we have. And again, this goes back to this whole like, Godhead, dark matter bundle, filtering neutrinos, guiding human interests and conduct, right? This is kind of what's happening there is that the things that the orchestration of the consciousness program are filtering for are radically changing. And so since 1610 or whatever it is, we've been in what they call the cross of planning, and the cross of planning is all about thinking about the future, hence planning. It's all about community. The secondary cross involved in this planning has to do with collective um collective activity, right? So it has all these like logical collective gates, which are basically about humanitarianism, improving the standard of living for everyone, new technologies, scientific method, all this kind of stuff. And both of these crosses are changing in 2027, and we're losing all the collectivity. And I think that's kind of the headline of this narrative, is that we go from having like five collective gates or something to one collective gate. And that means there is just way much, or I guess a greater absence of interest in collective life. So people will continue to be very tribal, and they will be increasingly individualistic. And so the solutions that come to help people in their personal lives are less and less likely to come from research projects outside of themselves. They're less likely to come from institutions that don't actually know these people, right? So it's like eventually we may start to see increased closures of hospitals and schools. We may start to see highly reduced internet access. At some point, we're probably going to see the breakdown of the electrical grid entirely. So it's like all of this collective infrastructure that we've spent, hundreds of years developing and benefiting from, little by little, there's going to be less de facto support in maintaining that. And again, like to this point where it's like reality sort of manages to conjure whatever narrative it needs for us, I think that's going to happen in a number of ways. I think some of it is a loss of ability to maintain these systems, right? That we already see, like in the tech world, right? People's inability to read code written in programming languages, right? Because the languages are so old, and yet we have all this infrastructure built on top of it. I think that media saturation plays a part, and people are kind of can't keep up with the speed of information that we get, and also the breadth of information that we get. We're just so Our lives start to become insensible when the rate of information that we consume reaches this extreme acceleration. So there's a fatigue there that obviously that's developing. Um, and
So,
then
sorry,
oh, go
just to
on.
summarize. So basically, we're moving from what was the cross of planning, which is all about thinking long term, thinking about the future, like building structures, not just for our own communities and ourselves, but also for strangers, essentially, like that will like help other people that we might not know. So that includes things like hospitals, our education system, like even things like international trade and stuff like that. And we're moving from that to what will happen in 2027 is the cross of the sleeping phoenix, which is much more individualistic and also more tribal, you said. So that means dealing more with people who are in our immediate environment and people that we do know.
Yeah, well, it's about the same amount of tribal. In fact, I think it's a little
Oh,
less tribal.
okay.
So basically it's like tribal life will continue. It will take on radically different forms. It will be, I guess, less about community and more about ambition, to use the keynotes of the gates involved.
Okay.
But it's really the collective stuff that's breaking down. Exactly.
Okay.
Like you said, the stuff that's social but impersonal, right? Which includes information access, includes resource distribution, supply chain stuff, all this kind of the routing of attention and resources and stuff to human beings whose faces you never see and whose names you never know.
Okay.
That that's kind of epi.
And the big
Um,
thing is about this like move towards more like individualistic, like self-reliance and just more individuality.
yeah, there's so many narratives about it that kind of get parroted around the human design world, and I don't want to inundate people with those because I think sometimes I also give people the wrong idea. Because I think, again, because this paradigm that we're currently in has been set for 400 years, we're all very accustomed to it, and I think that by default, something that threatens it can appear very scary to us, and I
Of
think people
course,
will
yeah.
sort of project a lot of pessimistic overlays onto some of these narratives. Like individualism sounds scary to a lot of people. It sounds bad. It sounds antisocial. And in human design, individual circuitry is not anti-social. It's just putting yourself first. And I think you can meet up someone who only has individual circuitry. That person has friends. That person looks out for people. That person is a human being. Um, like all that responds to social stimulus. It it's just what individual circuitry is. The reason that it's concerned on yourself is because it is attempting novelty and mutation, and you're only ever really going to find that in yourself. So it probes the inner life. First of all, it keeps the organism alive, right?
So like
Especially the human design.
survival kind of.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's preoccupied with survival, and especially some of the gates implicated in this time we're heading into are explicitly concerned with survival. But the survival stuff exists basically in order to for that organism to continue to differentiate itself, right? Again, to participate in this project of consciousness where it's like you being alive and thriving and looking out for yourself and living the life you're supposed to have is empowering of yourself, but that empowerment eventually translates into all this activity that other people benefit from. Like, first of all, you show them how to survive. Second of all, you show them new ways of doing things. Third of all, you show them, beautiful art they never considered. I've never seen someone paint like that before. What the fuck is this? You can't show that to someone if you're not taking care of yourself.
For sure. And I like that you said that because I definitely think that it can be scary for people to hear things like, oh, we're losing all of our collective channels and gates and stuff and everything's gonna be different. Like I've seen some things online where I'm just like, hey, like this is, it's veering into the territory of fear mongering because also too, something to keep in mind is that this is happening over another 400 years, right? It's not like everything all at once.
Mm.
But I like what you said about just like what does an increase in like individuality and like individual gates mean, like, and this turning towards the self and this idea of like that the project of differentiation being like more of the focus and more of of the point, and that still being able to benefit other people and being able to like interact with other people and have these relationships with other people and still being in community, just like that looking different than whatever it is that we've been used to up until now. Like that really feels like a hope frequency to me.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's a good way of putting it.
Ah, okay. Um, so what's the connection with this and the late Bronze Age collapse?
Just that that's kind of the only time in recorded history that we move from these same crosses, that we move from one set of crosses to this other set of crosses.
Okay.
So the time that it happened before that, human beings were still around, but there was no historical record. So since the invention of writing, this has only happened once, and so the late Bronze Age and the collapse are sort of the only area of history that we're able to study in which people are accounting for themselves. Witnesses of the same transition were able to speak through language, right, through
Hmm.
recorded language, to tell us what that was like. And however, the Bronze Age collapse was a dark age, and literacy did take a nosedive, at least in the Mediterranean West.
Yeah.
In China, there was, they say that the Bronze Age collapse didn't happen there, right? But it kind of did in a way. It was like the Zhou dynasty overthrow of the Shang dynasty, and it's not that people became illiterate, but all the writing that exists from that time basically is highly propagandistic,
Ah,
and it's very, very difficult to trust the historical record at this same during these same few years that we're talking about. Basically, let's say the 1200 to 800 BC.
okay.
It's about that. Um, So it's like, so it's funny, yeah. In the West, people literally become illiterate. In China, people like are just inundated with fake news, and we don't even know for sure what
Yeah.
really went on. So in either case, you have this sort of veil drawn around studying this period. But at least at the beginning, during the times of transition, where people were grieving and mourning this world that they were seeing disintegrate in front of them, you get so many of the same narratives
Mm,
that you get now. You get the first of all, the supply chain stuff we alluded to, like, because basically the Bronze Age was very similar to our time in the sense that it was this totally economically interdependent global economy that kind of deadlocked world powers from all out conflict with each other because their economies were so dependent on each other, right?
yeah.
So even though they had these adversarial relationships and there's a lot of tension, you wouldn't see these huge conflicts to the same degree. People were kind of kept in check by economic necessity until the collapse.
Yeah.
Um, so they had that kind of condition, but then these global powers couldn't support each other, right? People would say, that we have these letters from this period where people are like, I can't feed my kingdom, please send me some grain or whatever, and these letters would go unanswered because you'd have all these crises pop up in simultaneously in these different kingdoms. And some of those crises were social. Some of them were about civil unrest between classes. We know of at least one or two major metropolises that were kind of destroyed by their own people.
Mhm.
Um, there was a ton of migrancy as well. So, I mean, that I think that's another headline of the story for that time is like the immigration that was going on and the movement of peoples in the Mediterranean was so complete that aside from like Egypt only, basically, and even if people did remain in one spot, the cultural discontinuity was so comprehensive that those people didn't even call themselves by the same name anymore, right?
Okay.
Like the people that lived in Greece, the people that lived in Anatolia or whatever, like even if they literally stayed rooted, they didn't speak the same language. They probably had whatever different cultural they would adopt different cultural norms.
Mhm.
It's almost I almost think of it like taking a snow globe and just shaking it up. Like that's what happened to people on Earth at this time. Kind of everyone ended up everywhere
Yeah.
because people are just migrating in all these different places. Um,
Basically for survival, right?
for survival, and probably also, I do think that like seeing stuff collapse around you does create a sort of condition of freedom within yourself, right?
That's
You
very
don't
true.
you don't feel tethered to the stuff that you were brought up with or whatever. You feel like you can go and make your life for yourself anywhere. And so whether people are doing this always individually or if there were obviously I'm sure bigger groups of people that attempted to build a new life for themselves somewhere else, right?
Mhm.
Like that I don't know, it almost becomes like a quilt of culture that you see everywhere at that time. And and again, we like have this bias of our own time looking at that period and seeing it as illiterate and seeing the art that they're making as more crude or whatever, but there's a lot of playfulness to the art of this time and there's a lot of like experimentation and a lot of like I think people were busy surviving and maybe the pottery or whatever is a little more crude, but it's also just like I don't know, it's innovative. It's like you get this okay, I don't want to impose my own assumptions here, but
Please do.
you kind of get the sense that people were partying more during this time,
Oh,
you know?
okay.
I think that sense of freedom that a lot of people had and that ability to move and that ability to sort of be highly self-determined, right? Part of the reason I think this is because some of the gods that took off in popularity are like party gods, like Bes or whatever. This sort of syncretic Egyptian Mediterranean god kind of sprang up in all these unrelated places and is this very Dionysian kind of figure, and that's and that among the Phoenicians, who were like the people that arguably most thrived during this whole historical period, that he was big for them, kind of tells you something.
Oh, interesting. I
It's like
didn't know that about the late Bronze Age class, but that makes a lot of sense. I mean, what do you do at the end of the world? You party.
exactly,
Yeah,
exactly. Yeah.
interesting. Have you seen the Odyssey?
Yes, I did.
Okay, what did you think of it?
Oh, for I had a lot of fun.
Yeah.
Well, so that's because that's almost perfectly positioned to be the original poem or whatever. I guess we don't know when it was originally composed, but we
Hmm.
think that it would have been composed right kind of at the end of the Dark Age period.
Hmm.
So it's remembering across that entire 400-year span. It's the equivalent of someone like in the 2400s, 2500s writing a poem about our time
About
now.
now, yeah.
So it's like it itself is not a product of this dark age. It's being on the other side of that dark age and sort of remembering what life was like before.
Yeah. It's very interesting to me too that like a movie like this comes out at this time, like right when we're also about to have another global shift into the same kind of era as well. Do you feel like that's kind of like a sign or an omen?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's pretty weird, isn't it, that like
Yeah,
this that you know, one of the directors who puts who packs the theaters the most all of a sudden takes an interest in this particular story and this particular part of history is kind of uncanny that that's happening only 6 months before the transition takes
I
place.
know, right? Like, what a funny coincidence. But I honestly, I think that things like that do happen. Like, it's part of that same like subconscious like energy moving through the world. Because I also notice all sorts of other like signs and omens, like if you will, of just you know, even in my own personal life, like just feeling like, okay, I am leaving like one way of living and one way of being and kind of making space for something else. And it's not necessarily like I can't be like, oh, it's here right now, but I know that it's connected to this feeling of just like an incoming like societal and global shift. Like I can feel the tectonic plates of the world like moving and shaking and about to like do something and just having this feeling of like, oh, I think everything is going to be really, really different soon.
Yeah, totally. I mean, again, yeah, I do feel that like life insists, that the our experience of reality insists on certain things manifesting, right? And that certain human beings get to be conduits or witnesses of that, but that we all, we're all subject to these winds of history, and we all get different seeds for watching this stuff play out. But that when this orchestration of consciousness program wants something to happen in reality, when it wants to make a certain movement in the vessel of the earth or whatever, it finds a way to do that, and it shows up in individual lives through whatever means it can in order to get its point across, whether that's just to stimulate the imagination by giving them a dream, or having a movie available to them or something like that, or whether that theater plays out in your real life, in your interpersonal affairs. This is how astrology works, right? It's
Mhm.
like it's by whatever means it can, it finds a way to express its themes. And I think that people suffer when they see themselves as only subject to these machinations, as
Mm.
only instruments of the transpersonal will. Because in a sense, the whole human design project is this project of self determination, where I won't say that you like start to live your design and you immunize yourself to astrology, but it's like if astrological compulsion doesn't translate into your individual action, in a sense, you are kind of immune from it. The
Mm.
themes still play out around you. You still go to see the Odyssey and recognize it as a cultural moment or whatever. But if it's not compelling your behavior, if it's not changing what you were already going to do, then you still get to have your own life, and you don't have to participate anonymously as an instrument of a transpersonal force that has nothing to do with you.
Mm.
So you certainly, yeah, you don't end up as a participant of a project that isn't yours, right? Which so many of these things are.
Mm. Interesting. Um, Another question from Steph. So she asks, how does understanding your specific energy type empower you within the context of the end of the world, or I guess the end of the cross of planning?
Cool, I kinda just answered that in a
Yeah.
way.
Yeah.
It's like, yeah, so if if you wake up and start living as yourself, then you're less influenced by astrology in terms of, like, it's not having you change what you're doing, but more noticeably, you're not influenced by other people as much.
Mm,
I mean, that's so much the kernel of the human design project, is to not only recognize what is you and what is conditioning, but also to discover, the body's own consent, what they call inner authority, and to first of all to sensitize yourself enough to recognize that, but then also to cultivate enough faith to follow it when it speaks. You basically end up kind of never betraying yourself,
mm,
right?
mhm,
And not betraying yourself includes obviously keeping you safe and healthy and happy, but then it also means that you end up being very delighted by life because you keep stumbling into things that are you and that are relevant to you and things that you like. I mean, it's not like challenges disappear or whatever, but the nature of resistance is very different because obstacles come in your path, or you're braced against something, and it's easier to track how that's kind of there for your own development, right?
mhm,
And it's not rationalizing these things or making excuses about them, but it's sort of like there's a sensibility to the things that show up in your life, I think, when you always follow the body's consent. Nothing is really random. Nothing is not for you when it happens. You're not in the wrong place. You
mhm,
didn't make the wrong move, and now you have to deal with the fallout. You have to deal with, the, something obstructive or adversarial because it is exactly the lesson you need right now, right? I think even without human design, people kind of start to intuit this relationship with life's struggles and challenges, but
yeah. As you get older.
exactly, but
Yeah.
it does become pretty undeniable, pretty clear when you live your design.
Interesting. So this theory, this practice, this philosophy, it's like a very weird thing. And I mean that like in the most endearing way, of course. Like I love it, but I do recognize that it's very weird for a lot of people. And at least for me, I feel like that's part of its charm. And it's also been my introduction into learning about things like the I Ching and Kabbalah and even like Taoism and learning about chakras and whatever, just all the different things that make up the philosophy. And I'm curious if you think that its strangeness adds to a kind of sense of credibility, because like I've started talking to people more about it like in my life, and at first I think I felt kind of shy, but then a lot of people were just like, no, tell me more, like I'm curious, I want to know like more about this thing. And as I said, it was like friends of mine who urged me to make an episode about it. Do you think that there's something about the strangeness of it all, especially, in this era of like institutional collapse, a turn towards the self, like all of this stuff? Do you think that there's something about human design specifically that makes people drawn to it?
Hmm. Well, what is the I do have an answer to that, but what is the strangeness that you're talking about?
I think a lot of people don't live their lives necessarily always like super conscious of mm, I don't like mystical ideas or things like that, right? Like I think a lot of people live very secular lives where they're not necessarily always looking beneath the surface, or they
Mm,
might associate those things with like, oh, you're a conspiracy theorist, or oh, you're crazy, or oh, you're this and that, whatever, because it's not normative. Not to say
mm,
that it's like bad, but it's just not normative. It's not what people talk about just generally. And
right.
you have to have a kind of openness to those kind of ideas in the first place to even begin to, I think, like really contemplate the idea of like, oh, there's a system called human design and it incorporates the I Ching and Kabbalah and all this stuff.
Right.
Like, you know what I mean?
Well, haven't we? I mean, aren't we kind of in the middle of a collective reckoning of a bunch of fringe and esoteric things besides human design? Isn't human design kind of a part of this whole, whatever new age moment we're in, where people are becoming more and more available to these weird, spiritual, esoteric ideas in general? Like, you know what I mean? Like, isn't human
Mhm.
design kind of a symptom or a piece of a bigger wave?
Well, I definitely think so because I think that especially when you're living in an era where it's like, okay, these institutions that were part of your life for basically as long as you've been alive, for like as long as you can remember a lot of like human history and stuff, they're collapsing, they don't have the answers, and we're seeing like their failure to like answer these types of questions for people. I think then that kind of begets an openness or like looking for something else.
Right. Yeah, alternative options, yeah.
Mhm,
I, yeah, I think that's definitely a moment we're having. I think that, you know, I wonder how much of it is caused by the internet, right? And this ability to be totally siloed into our reality tunnels just through information consumption. That's, in your imagination, you could even say that that's changing the ontological texture of reality, right? When so many fewer minds agree on what is true, right? That's just happening everywhere. No one can agree on what is true when it comes to really trivial matters, but
mhm,
you get enough of that going on at once, and then that starts to affect more foundational ontological assumptions about the world and about reality, right?
mhm.
That at first we just don't agree if a certain event really happened, but then eventually we don't agree on whether something like the aura really exists or what the nature of God is or something like that. And not to say that there hasn't been a proliferation of different views on these things anyway, but I think that it's becoming more granular in our time, right? Like everything about these past couple centuries has been, first of all, establishing an incredible amount of cultural detail and specificity through industrialization and through the infosphere brought about by the internet, right?
Mhm.
And now that we have so many grains to work with, the things that we can build for ourselves are that much more intricate, right?
It's true, yeah.
I
And I mean,
mean,
I even
you.
see it in the way that like a lot of things that would have been considered like super ultra niche like always find their way into the mainstream, like even if it's just for 15 minutes, like they get a news cycle.
Mhm. Totally, yeah. Yeah, and so much of it is preserved and still available, like fringe cultural moments that maybe at their peak only had an audience of 15,000 people in the 80s or something. Someone now can discover that, and that can be a big part of their life, right?
Mhm,
Whether that's a cultural thing or area of intellectual inquiry or whatever it is, it's like people can so pick and choose and curate their not only their taste but just their whole outlook, their whole worldview. I mean, it's so common now to have someone who, listens to a genre of Eastern European music and Argentinian music from totally different decades, and those are two things that they're really about. And in any other era, they would not have access to those two things,
mhm.
right? That's just two things, right? So again, like once you just bring more and more strange fringe pieces of the world into your cultural appetite, it's like you by de facto start to approach the world with a highly differentiated, highly unique perspective and set of priorities.
Yeah. And is that connected to, I've seen you like talk about this a little bit on Twitter, just like, is that connected to the kind of turn towards the archival that'll happen post 2027?
Yeah, I forgot about that. That's true, isn't
Yeah.
it? Yeah, that's something that also people grasp secularly, right? That's
Mhm.
not. I don't think human design even says that explicitly, but it's so
Oh.
obvious, and what human design does say is very compatible with that. Because, first of all, so some of this has to do with being with projector life, that projectors are relatively new, and that the more that society starts to be structured with projectors in mind, the more we will see the valuation of the role of curator or the role of archivist,
Mhm.
because essentially what projectors are doing are they're working with systems and they're arranging and they're noticing where the tendency of things. Fundamentally, that's kind of what a projector is doing. That's
Yeah.
why with another human being, they make such great, like you said, human design readers or life coaches or midwives of any kind, right?
Yeah.
because they're looking at an organism, they're looking at a person, and they're seeing where is this person tending? Where are they leaning? What is naturally coming out of them? What seems like an effortless, obvious elaboration of this individual based on what they're already expressing in life.
Mhm.
So projectors are also doing that with non-living things. They're doing that with artifacts of culture. They're doing that with literal objects. And so that's, more and more, not only will there be a greater valuation of archivism and curation and stuff, but there will also be entirely new fluencies developed for these practices, right? We're just at the dawn of beginning to appreciate what's, the fact that I'm having to use two words to describe this practice already speaks to how, you know, burgeoning it is, that this capacity, this fluency that's only in the first stages of its gestation, like hasn't even revealed its true nature to us yet, because civilizationally we're not really there to appreciate it or give it its.
Okay, interesting. Um, So speaking of like, okay, we're gonna be more projector led and all this stuff, 2027. I'm curious about what human design says about the role of money. Because I think I saw you like tweet about this a couple days ago or something, and I was just like, oh, that's very interesting. Because I see a lot of human design analysts and like experts will like talk about like how you can use your human design to like make money and this and that, but I'm like, okay, but what about the actual like concept of money? Like, where does that fit in with this, system and this framework? And this is pure curiosity. I'm just like, I wonder.
And if you'd like to listen to the extended portion of this episode, you can do so at patreon.com/Debby Friday.
So just to finish up, do you have anything that you want to plug here?
Plug.
Yeah.
I want to get a little book out about. I've got most of it written about 2027 before 2027 happens,
Mhm.
so look out for that. And then I do give readings. My website is attunement.info. I do individual readings, and I've also like to, if people have never had their chart read before, I definitely do a lot of newbie readings. But increasingly, my practice has pivoted basically towards HD informed talk therapy, where it's really just more about the person's life, and then we bring the chart into it when necessary.
Mhm.
And I feel like that, in the same way as when I first got into HD itself, and it was so obviously my calling, I kind of feel like that's been happening with that particular modality. So,
That is sick. Awesome.
yeah.
I love that. Okay.
It's
Well,
definitely tried those things at the website. Yeah.
yes. Okay.
Yeah.
What is it? Attunement.info?
Yeah.
Attunement.info. All right. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. This was such a great chat. Like, I feel like I learned so much and I learned so much about human design, but also about you and your work and your perspectives. And this was great. Thank you.
Yeah. Great connecting with you. Thanks for
Yeah.
having me on.
So awesome. Okay.